Hi, welcome to this video, and in this video we are going to understand CI/CD pipelines. What is CI/CD? And we will take examples, and we will take an example of a tool as well to understand what actually CI/CD is and how it is being used in the industry. Okay, so let's start the video. Understanding CI/CD, let's first understand what is continuous integration, then we will move to continuous delivery, then we'll see combining both of them what it actually is, then we will try to understand this with an example. Further we will move towards steps involved in the CI/CD part, then we will understand the most important or the used tool for this CI/CD is Jenkins. Then we'll understand a little bit more about Jenkins. So first, what is continuous integration? In very simple terms, think of continuous integration as, suppose in a development team or in a product team, the product is being developed step by step. What happens is that you first develop one feature, then another feature. Also, you cannot just let your customer wait for you to complete the entire product and then you deploy it and then you build it. So what happens is, as we keep developing the product, we keep building it, we keep putting code analysis, putting unit test on it, we keep deploying it as well. So that's the part where we keep building it and adding all those features. It's called continuous integration. Similarly, continuous delivery. Suppose we have developed one feature, we create a step-by-step process or a pipeline. Pipeline as in, it's not the water pipeline that you might be thinking. It's pipeline in terms is, it's a logical process, step 1, step 2, step 3, that flows one after another, and it also gets repeated at every other cycle. So that's continuous integration. And continuous delivery is, first we have developed this feature, we have integrated all the small things, build it up, and they had deployed it. We have deployed our one feature. That's continuous delivery. Deployment and delivery. Deployment is putting the code on the server. Delivery is taking some useful permissions from the teams and then providing the application to our end user or the customer, mainly we are talking about. So summing all this, what it actually is, how you code your application and it will be delivered in a reliable and accessible way to your customer. Let's say an example. Suppose you have a app here that you have developed on your personal PC. Okay. Now your customer is sitting in any part of the globe, right? Your customer is sitting remote, or you can say in another country, right? So this person is sitting in another country. Now how you actually build this application on your personal PC, and then in step by step you make this available to the end customer. That's all CI/CD is all about. Okay, you create a step by step process, and at the end your customer will be able to actually use the product he has asked for, and the deliverables will be good. Okay, so now coming to next part, we have understood what it is, we have understood with an example as well. Let's further move to steps involved in CI/CD. So what are the steps? What are those steps am I talking about? Okay, let me just write it in a clean manner. Let's use the green pen. So the major steps include unit testing, then actually comes the part. So the another step after unit testing comes is static code analysis. Then comes code quality check. Then comes automation testing. and then the final deployment part. Okay, so let's try to understand what each of these steps are. Unit testing is, suppose you are building a product and you have developed one feature, and that feature you have to independently test whether it is working correct logically. Isn't there something wrong with it? That's the role of a developer. So testing feature wise, okay, that's unit testing. Then the static code analysis. Static code analysis means that your code should be run on a certain quality checks, whether the indentation is proper, whether you have not used some extra variables, you have declared extra variables and you have not used them into your code. That's static code analysis. Then comes the code quality or vulnerability check. Like suppose you are writing your code and you have used some dependency as in you have used some third party library or package to actually put some functionality into your code base. Those code quality or the vulnerability checks are done, that whether some third party might make your app vulnerable to attackers or hackers. Then the fourth part, automation testing. Once all the features are rolled, all the code is written, the automation testing is done on overall feature, right? Suppose the unit testing was on simply one feature. Let's say you are writing a calculator function and you are doing a unit testing on addition function or subtraction function. Automation testing is once your code is finished, done, then you take the test on all of that code base, right? That's the automated way of doing. You are not going to manually write those tests. You will use some tool like Selenium for the automation testing part. Then comes the deployment part. Deployment part is simple. You just deploy it into some EC2 machine, AWS or Azure or GCP, and in that EC2 as well, you might deploy it on a Docker container or a Kubernetes cluster. So guys, these are mainly the steps in CI/CD. I'm talking about the general steps. These steps can be further modified depending upon the need of an organization and depending upon the setup the organization is currently using. So steps in CI/CD, yes. So these are the steps in CI/CD. Okay, now let's understand our most important tool that we have known as Jenkins. Let's learn about Jenkins a little bit. Okay, so what Jenkins does is that suppose you are writing a code and you are a single developer, let's say dev1. Okay, so you might be pushing your code somewhere. That's a GitHub repo or some other repo. It might be GitLab as well. Okay, so you are putting your code here, right? Now what CI/CD is Jenkins will does is Jenkins will create a pipeline, the meaningful pipeline, like logical pipeline. It's not something you can see physically. It will create a pipeline like that. And for each steps that we discussed here, Jenkins will create a separate job for each of the process. Let's say for unit testing, we have a tool name as Maven. Jenkins will make sure that the unit testing of each code that you have pushed on GitHub. Let's say you have written your code, you have V1 and you have committed your code, okay, and you have created a pull request on GitHub. What this Jenkins keeps on doing, it's keep getting a watch. It keeps seeing that whether a new pull request is being done on the GitHub repo. Your GitHub repo, it will keep sending the checks, and if there is a new pull request, it will create a job, and in that job Maven will be used to create the unit test for that particular code. Then what other things it does? We talked about static code analysis and code vulnerability checks. For that, it have a tool called as SonarQube. Okay, this SonarQube separate job will be done, separate job will be created, and this separate job SonarQube will make sure the code that is being pushed to your GitHub repo, the latest PR, passes all the code vulnerability checks and all the code analysis checks, right? Similarly, we have something called as reports. So what we do is in the steps as well, that when we create unit test, when we create code analysis, when we create vulnerability code checks, we maintain all those steps in the form of reports as well, so that if an organization want to see what were the code checks or what were the unit test reports were when the pipeline was created, when somebody pushed the code on GitHub and the pipeline was triggered, what were the reports back then. So we have a tool here as for reports as well in the Jenkins itself. And we have finally K8 cluster or Docker. Let's say you are deploying your code on Docker or some EC2 machine, you have to just plug your Jenkins with that EC2 using some plugin inside your Jenkins, and then your EC2, your code will be deployed on that particular EC2. Okay, so let's revise first. Maven is used for automation, Maven is used for testing, SonarQube will be used for quality checks, code vulnerability test, reports will be collected for each of the pipeline trigger, and we can also deploy on K8, Docker or EC2 using the Jenkins. So Jenkins act as sort of a middleman. It keeps all the plugins in itself and it will allow you to actually do each of the pipeline steps through it. That's why it's called a CI/CD tool. That's why it's the most useful tool. Okay, the most used one. Also, what it does is it actually deploys all your code in different stages as well. Let's say that's your GitHub, that's your app, developer have written it, and then you have Jenkins here. Now what it will also do is, first it will deploy it on a dev environment, then on staging, or we can call it pre-prod, then it will deploy it into the prod environment. That's the customer environment. This is the, each company depending on their needs have different environments set up. First, very common is dev environment, then staging environment, then the production environment. Environment is as in all the pipeline, all the setup, all the servers are set up in the dev environment. So when a developers are actually coding the app and they want to test something, they are actually deploying it into dev environment. So once the Jenkins pipeline is created, it simply first deploys everything into the dev environment so that the internal company people can test the application here. Okay, what is running inside the dev environment? Some EC2 machine. Okay, on that EC2 machine your code will be put up. Inside the EC2 machine there must be some Docker container and the code will be running on that Docker container. Cool. So that's the dev environment. Then comes the staging or the pre-prod. What it is a more advanced, like you will have certain users, not the fake ones, some users that will be testing your product in the live manner. So it will have more EC2 machines, okay, and some worker machines. The last one, the most important one, is the production environment. In the production environment you will have at least 3 to 4 master nodes or 10 to 15 worker nodes. Usually we set up a Kubernetes cluster here that will handle everything with masters and node as well. Now why it is that we have 3 to 4 master and 10 to 15 worker nodes in prod, and why do we not have the same setup as in staging and prod? It is because that setup is quite costly. So when you are delivering your application to the customer, you want it the best, so the customer money can be effectively used. So it becomes actually meaningful to not invest resources in the staging environment that much. So we keep a staging environment as few EC2 machines and a few worker machines. Those worker machines are also EC2. By worker machines, I mean if we are deploying some Kubernetes cluster, so we will have a master machine and we will have some worker nodes. So in that manner, I am saying worker node and master machine. Okay. Now I believe you are clear with what else Jenkins does is, apart from creating a pipeline job, it deploys your application, your code, your build to different environments as well, as I have shown you in this first dev environment, then staging, then prod. Okay. So guys, I believe Jenkins and what is CI/CD is now a little bit clear, and I thank all of you to watch this video. Let's see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.